So tonight we're getting back into the Book of Jubilees. We're on episode 6 right now, and we're going to be talking about the wall, what we call the wall. Before we get into the thick of it here, folks, I just want to see what we have in the live chat. Another thing, too, before we get started, I noticed that Hannah was kind of cutting in and out a little bit. The audio was a little bit finicky during the time that she was playing. Let me know if that happens with me. If you hear it kind of clicking a little bit or cutting in and out a little bit. If you hear that anytime during the live stream, please let me know and I will fix that. Okay, well, let's see what we have here in the live chat. We have Mary says, Shalom, Christopher, Hannah, and all. Chipmunk says, Shalom, everyone. Calamento says, Shalom to all. Seek the Lord says, Shalom. Al says, Shalom, everyone. Great blessings every day. Lovely music. Hannah, always. Felix says, good evening, everyone. Chipmunk says, beautiful job, Hannah. Well, shalom, shalom, welcome and blessings to y'all. Blessings multiplied to you and your families. Hope you're having an awesome, awesome time. All right. So we will begin here. It's been a little while, right? It's been like a little over a week since we were into this. And so we're picking up here in the Book of Jubilees. The story begins with Jacob dying. If you're new to this whole thing, the Book of Jubilees is a book that is found in two different corpuses, if you will. Number one, the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Book of Jubilees was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Also in the Bible of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. That's right. Orthodox, Christian Orthodox, mainstream Orthodox kind of church has the Book of Jubilees in their Bible, actually. It's in their Bible canon. The Book of Jubilees is really an interesting read. I've read through it a number of times myself. It reads very much like the Book of Enoch. However, I do believe that we have sufficient evidence that the Book of Jubilees was written for purposes that are a little bit different than what you might think. We delved into all that in the first episode. To make a long story short, the author of Jubilees, I do believe, interprets the scripture a lot more literally than he should interpret it, and he forms the narrative to support that literal interpretation. However, we're going to talk about lots of things here tonight. We're going to pick up in the narrative of Jacob dying. The Book of Jubilees basically is the rewriting of Genesis. So it talks about all the stories of Genesis, but it rewrites it, basically, giving extra details and different details, all that kind of stuff. So, we'll pick up here where we left off. And by the way, folks, again, I should say this now because it's been a little while since we were studying this. If you did not watch the first 5 episodes, and you find this episode interesting at all, or if you find the Book of Jubilees interesting at all, please go and watch the first 5 episodes. If you're new to this channel, we do this kind of thing all the time. We have already went through the entirety of the canonical Bible, everything, Genesis to Revelation, all 66 books, actually 73, more than 73. We read through a number of the apocryphal books, also early church fathers, Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, lots of things like this, right? So if this is right up your alley, make sure that you're subscribed, make sure you're following, and enjoy the content here. Mary says, would that have been taken to Ethiopia by the quote-unquote eunuch? Very, very good question, Mary. Yeah. If 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 you're listening to this and you don't know what Mary's talking about, so in the book of Acts, it talks about this eunuch that goes to Ethiopia. At this point, I don't have evidence to say that was the case. It's a possibility. However, it's also a possibility that they had this book from earlier. The Ethiopian church traces their roots all the way back to Prince Menelik. This would be way back in the days of Solomon. We know the Book of Jubilees is not that old, but it's possible that the Book of Jubilees made it to Ethiopia before the eunuch did. But it's also possible that the eunuch took it to Ethiopia as well. So it's a very good question, Mary. I really appreciate that. And I'm sorry I can't really give you a clear answer on that. We don't have the evidence to support any claim at this point in time. Anybody who's listening to this, if you have any evidence, then please let me know. Let me know in the live chat or send me an email, christopherenoch@proton.me, christopherenoch@proton.me, and let me know. We want to make sure we're at the cutting edge here of biblical scholarship to make sure that we're right up to snuff. But as far as I know, we don't have that information. That's not available. Okay, yeah, so taking it back to where we left off there, a little over a week ago, Jacob is dying. He called his 12 sons in, and he's going through them one by one at a time, and he's telling each of them what they are. So he gets to the second and the third, and then he basically prophesies over them. So tonight, live stream, we're going to call it The Wall, episode 6. One idea runs this entire book, and really it is not necessarily a gentle one. So we're going to start off with Genesis chapter 49, and we're going to read verses 5 through 7. It says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. So again, this is Jacob prophesying or speaking over his sons just before he gives up the ghost. So he's at Simeon and Levi right now, and this is what he's saying over them. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. My soul, don't come into their counsel. My glory, don't be united to their assembly. For in their anger they killed men. In their self-will they hamstrung cattle. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So here's Simeon and Levi, of course, brothers, instruments of cruelty in their habitation. Remember what they did to Shechem? Yeah, remember that story? Again, we went through this in previous episodes of this mini-series. Actually, I shouldn't say it's a mini-series. This is a long series. It's not a mini-series. But yeah, we already spoke about that. So Jacob is not very happy about the way that they handled it. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. That is a father at the end of his life pronouncing more or less a curse on the anger of two of his own sons and announcing that they will be scattered. Doesn't sound very good. It's not vague, not very vague. The names, the names are pretty clear. And the issue is pretty clear. Their anger, their wrath. He says that it was fierce and it was cruel. He says that he will scatter them for it. That's Genesis' verdict on Simeon and Levi, or more precisely, it's Jacob's verdict on Simeon and Levi. A passage that's commonly understood as looking back at what they did at Shechem. Now, in the Book of Jubilees, that same act, the same city, the same swords, the same massacre becomes the reason that Levi's descendants are chosen for the priesthood. Not forgiven for it, not despite it, but because of it. Like, this is the reason why he was chosen. So tonight is a really hard night here, talking about this whole scene. We're going to dig deep into it, deeper than we have ever dug before. And by the way, folks, talking about digging, share the live stream, okay? Anybody that you know, if you think that you have a smidgen of a chance of reaching somebody that might be interested in this stuff, share the live stream with them, or put it on your social media feed, whatever you got to do. Now's a good time to do it. So we're going to look here at the idea that runs underneath this entire book. And it is not necessarily a gentle idea. And, we're not going to really make it into a gentle one, because we want to take it as it is. We don't want to change anything. We want to let it land as it was written, right? So, yeah, so tonight we're going to get into all this. And we're going to get into it very deep. And so, first of all, the text that we're looking at tonight, the Jewish text and the Book of Jubilees, is participating in a Jewish argument about Torah, about identity, purity, and how Israel should live. And the sharpest voice against what this book does is really not necessarily anything that we make up here, but it's actually found in Genesis itself. So if at any point tonight it starts to sound to you like, look at those people, look what those people believed, what, it's kind of shocking to you, then we need to go back to the verses that we just read there in Genesis chapter 49. The condemnation is not coming from just something we make up here in the live stream. It's actually coming from inside the text. That's the whole spine of tonight. And we're going to get through this we're going to dig through this. We're going to mine. We're going to pan through the streams of the scriptures here and pan out the nuggets of gold. Now, another thing, again, just before we get really deep here, the book of Jubilees, as we mentioned in previous episodes, comes from most likely comes from the 2nd century BC, a period when Jewish identity was under intense pressure from Hellenistic culture and internal disputes over how Israel should live. That helps to explain why what exactly we're going to read and why it says what it says. It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. So I want both halves on the table, so to speak, because leaving out the first makes it a little bit too cruel. Leaving out the second makes it, not necessarily in its entire context. All right, so here we are, episode 6. The episode 1 was, what about this book really? What is this book? Excuse me, and the dating of it, where it comes from. Episode 2, who wrote it, the author, and roughly when it was written. Episode 3, we also talk about that as well. Episode 2 and 3 kind of go together as twins. Episode 4, how the author of Jubilees worked. The 5 the 5 tools. Remember that, guys? And then episode 5, we spoke about the machine and the number at the end of it. Tonight, like just in the very same way that we did in previous episodes, I'm going to present a critical thinking challenge again, okay? At the end of the live stream tonight. For those of you who want to test your critical thinking skills, that is going to be what we're going to end with tonight, the critical thinking challenge, and we'll see how we do. So again, the episode 5 was the machine and the number at the end of it. Tonight we're talking about basically, again, we're kind of like quote unquote the machine and what the machine was built to protect. If you had to reduce this book to one single sentence, and I don't think you should really per se, but just for the sake of talking about it, I think it would be this: Israel and the nations must not mix, should not mix. Not, maybe they should mix, not would, not it would do better if they were not to mix, but must not mix. It's something that we find this in the Book of Jubilees, it's a thread, like a boundary between between Israel and the Gentiles, if you will. So it's like there's this very clear line that the author is drawing, and if we understand the culture and the time in which it was written, it helps to understand, especially the circumstances surrounding it, helps us to understand why he wrote that. Here we have a graphic here, the 5 walls and the same wall. Okay? So we're not going to be, it's not one theme among several. It's the organizing principle of this book. You can perfectly predict what this author is going to do with the passage before you read it, once you understand the underlying structure of this book. So we have blood at the top here, both kinds, what you eat and who you marry. Then we have the body, nakedness and covering. Then we have language, which one is quote unquote real and which ones come from a curse, which tongue is real, if you will. Then we have the table, who you eat with, who you can eat with. And then at the very bottom here, you see the boundary itself. What happens to somebody who breaches the boundary? 5 walls. And they're basically all the same wall. We'll do the first 2 tonight, blood and the body. And if, Lord willing, if we have time, we'll get into the language and the table too. We'll talk about Babel, the Tower of Babel, a little bit more about that. We've done a lot of study on the Tower of Babel on this channel before. So if that interests you, make sure you go back and take a look at those videos on YouTube, especially. And make sure you're subscribed, by the way, if that's interesting as well. So the first wall here, the blood. Let's start basically where the Torah starts on this. So let's go to Genesis chapter 9. And let's go to verse 4 right here. It says, "But flesh is its life, that is, its blood, you shall not eat." So if we start where the Torah starts, basically about about blood, Noah comes off the ark. God gives him permission to eat meat, or at least he talks about it anyway. Not that he didn't have permission to eat meat before, again. So some people argue, that they didn't eat meat before that. Well, okay, so in the scriptures, it doesn't say anything about meat, but that doesn't mean that they didn't eat meat, okay? I didn't say anything about eating chicken. Does that mean I've never ate chicken in my life? No, just because it's absent from the text or the narrative doesn't mean that they didn't do it. That's another whole subject. Again, we spoke a little bit about that before on the live streams. So one of the earliest explicit food prohibitions in the scriptures given to Noah and to his sons long before Sinai and long before Israel existed. And this is another good piece of evidence that the Torah actually existed long before Moses. Think about this for a moment. Especially when it comes to Christians, if you mention the Torah, if you mention the law of God, what's the first thing they think about? Animal sacrifices. Maybe they might think about dietary laws. I don't know. But mainly animal sacrifices. If that was first, so that's part of the Torah. And you might say, in Genesis, the story of Abel and Cain, they sacrificed. Where did they get that idea from? It doesn't say that God told them to. Now, does that mean that God didn't? Again, just because it doesn't say it, it doesn't mean it never happened. But it says that they especially Abel, sacrificed the first, brought the firstborn of the flock and all that kind of stuff in exactly the same prescription as the Torah of Moses. Exactly. Bringing the firstborn, bringing the lamb. How did he know about sacrifice at all? How did he even think about sacrifice? And how did he know exactly what to sacrifice? How did he know that it was supposed to be a lamb, a firstborn lamb? How did he know that it wasn't supposed to be something else? It could be anything, right? It could have been a tree or whatever. It could have been anything. It could have been an insect. How did he know exactly what to sacrifice? Could have been something that he made himself by his hands. Sacrifice this item that I made. How do you know that? How did he know exactly what to sacrifice and exactly where to sacrifice it? And again, I do believe this is exactly the reason why Cain was refused, because Cain did not follow the Torah. Notice, in the law that was delivered through Moses, it says if you're going to bring of the livestock of animals, you bring the best, the firstborn, the best. If you're going to bring as an offering, a sacrifice from the crops, you're to bring the first fruits, the best of the crops. It says that Abel brought the firstborn, exactly how Moses said it should be done. Again, long before Moses ever existed. But it doesn't say anything about Cain bringing the first fruits. It just says that he brought of his crops. Just, it could have been the bottom of the barrel. It could have been, so he didn't honor God like that. And that's the reason why God did not like his offering as much as he liked Abel's. I know the whole story from evangelical Christians. Well, Abel, he brought the blood sacrifice. That's why he was accepted, and Cain didn't. Nice try. That does not work if you know the Torah, because in the Torah itself, blood sacrifice is not required. It's not an absolute necessity for every atonement. In the Torah, we have prayer alone making atonement. We have prayer as in incense, making atonement. We have flour as in the stuff you make bread with, flour, making atonement. Bring flour and put it on the altar. That will be your atonement. We have repentance, making atonement. And a number of other things as well. Not always. Blood was not always required for atonement. Okay? So that argument does not work. So, how did Cain know? How did Abel know? And then long before Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Job. Around the time of Abraham, they believe that Job lived. You know, the book of Job, he knew what to sacrifice, how to sacrifice it, when to sacrifice it, all the details, long before Moses ever existed. Noah, long before Moses ever existed, he knew the difference between the unclean animals and the clean animals as per Torah, long before Moses ever existed. And here again, Noah knew about the laws against eating blood long before Moses ever existed. You might say, Christopher, well, this is too much for me to handle. How do you make sense of this? I liken it to, we're all listening to this live stream. We're all watching this live stream. We got internet connections. We got, be it cell phones or tablets or computers, devices, television sets, TVs. So there's a thing called the cloud, right? Yeah, we all know what the cloud is, right? Like servers on the internet that's not local to your device. And you can upload or download from the cloud. Follow me? So I look at the Torah like that. The Torah is God's word, and God's word is eternal, never needs to change, never needs an amendment, never needs a correction, because God always does it right the first time, and also because the word of God reflects God. If God is always perfect, his word is always perfect, never changes. If God never changes, his word will never change. Psalm 119, verse 89, thy word, O Lord, is forever settled in heaven. Forever settled in heaven. When I read that, I think about the word of God that has no beginning, no ending, because the word of God is God's expression to his creation. It's really... It encompasses the character and the essence of God. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was... So that's what the Word of God is. It's eternal. It doesn't have a beginning. It doesn't have an ending. So the Torah that Moses brought was the Word of God, which did not have a beginning and will never have an end. Never. So it existed when the earlier patriarchs existed, long before Moses. The Torah was there in the spiritual cloud, in the heavenly cloud, and Abel could download from it, so to speak. You see what I mean? So Abel downloaded the information. Yeah, this is what I'm supposed to sacrifice: a lamb and a firstborn lamb. And Cain should have known to bring the first fruits, the best of the crops. But there's no evidence that he ever did. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob seems like they knew all the details of sacrifice and sin and all that kind of stuff. In fact, Genesis chapter 25 says that Abraham knew the Torah, literally in the scriptures. Let me show you guys. Genesis chapter 25, and we go to verse 5. It's Genesis chapter 26, verse 5. Genesis chapter 26, verse 5, right here. Okay, it says, and this is God speaking, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge and my commandments. Well, where did we ever see that Abraham received the commandments? It doesn't say. It doesn't give us those details, but it says here, obviously, that he knew the commandments because God said Abraham obeyed the commandments. Not only that, but the statutes. This is part of the Torah. And my laws. See that word laws? Now, if you go into the Hebrew, I'll show you right here. Go right into the Hebrew. That word laws is literally Torah. In other words, what it says is Abraham obeyed my Torah right there in the Hebrew. Okay? So the Torah existed. Abraham downloaded it, so to speak. So did Jacob. So did Isaac. So did Job. So did Noah. Noah down, because it says in the account of Noah that the animals on the ark were separated between clean and unclean. He knew. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So this whole thing about the blood and all that kind of stuff here, Genesis chapter 9, verse 4, this isn't just another piece of evidence that the Torah existed back in those days. So some people would say that Noah represents humanity in this story. This is commonly understood as a command with universal scope to whoever will, if you will. And the reason given isn't hygiene. Genesis grounds the prohibition in the fact that the life is in the blood. So let's go to Jubilees, chapter 6. And let's go to verse 12. And verse 16, verse 12 and verse 13. It says, "And this testimony is written concerning you, that you should observe it continually, so that you should not eat on any day any blood of beasts or birds or cattle during all the days of the earth. And the man who eats the blood of beast or of cattle or of birds during all the days of the earth, he and his seed shall be rooted out of the land. And command the children of Israel to eat no blood, so that their names and their seed may be before the Lord our God continually." So, you hear the difference in temperature between Genesis and Jubilees? You know, the Book of Jubilees is called the Little Genesis. I can just hear somebody right now going, "Oh, but Jubilees is not in the Bible. Why do you even look at it?" Not in your Bible, maybe not. It is found in the Orthodox Church, the Tawahedo Orthodox Church in Ethiopia. It's found in their Bible. You might say, "Oh, who heard of that church? That church is nothing." Really? 45 to 50 million worldwide members? A little bit more than nothing, I would say. Genesis gives you a prohibition. Jubilees gives you an eternal ordinance for them and for their generations forever, and it comes with a penalty. There's no expiry on it, no negotiating it. Okay? Again, Christians think that the Torah expired. Since when? It says, I have personally counted over 40 times in the laws of, in the books of Moses, just the books of Moses alone. And we're not talking about the other scriptures. I personally counted over 40 times where it says that the law of God is forever. I know of a rabbi who said that he counted every time where it says that the law, that the Torah is forever from Genesis to Malachi, and he says it says that 65 times. 65 times. 2 Kings 17 verse 37 is a good example of that as well. Check this out, folks. 2 Kings chapter 17, and you go down to verse 37, and this is what it says. "And the statutes, the ordinances, and the law, and the commandment which he wrote for you, you shall be careful to observe." How long? until the Messiah comes. Oh, wait a second. I think I was reading it through different lenses here. What does it actually say? You shall be careful to observe it forever. You shall not fear other gods. So, Jubilees brings that same thing down, if you will. The same kind of idea. It's eternal. So, the author of Jubilees is not contradicting the existing prohibition. He is intensifying it. He's doing what Matthew does to Mark. He intensifies it. So it just dawned on me just now, folks. It just hit me right now. This is a good example of how a later scribe will expound upon earlier texts. So we know that the book of Genesis was written before the book of Jubilees. The book of Jubilees came along much later, and the author of Jubilees is intensifying, interpolating, embellishing, adding to the text, doing exactly what Matthew does to Mark. And we know that Mark was the first gospel written. Matthew came later, at least a decade later, they figure. So the author here of Jubilees intensifies it, taking a prohibition already found in Genesis and making it permanent and the penalty much more explicit. And we have a severe penalty as well. So taking something the Torah states once and driving it in until it can't be pulled out, basically, is what he's doing. Notice which tool that is. Now, I'm talking about the previous episode. We did this about, 8 or 9 days ago, episode 5. It's not the contradiction tool. He hasn't reversed anything. That's expansion, tending toward something heavier. The law was there, the Torah was there, he just welded it in place. So then we got the other kind of blood, as we see here in the chart. And we go here as well into the next thing here. One category, not two. So two kinds of blood, but one category in the animal and in the family line. Here's where it gets interesting, and where I think you can see how the mind of the author of Jubilees actually works. I think the author is applying the same broader purity logic to both. There's the blood of the animal, which must not be consumed because life is still in it. And there is the family line, which Jubilees treats as something that must be kept separate, pure and holy. But we should be clear here, the text never explicitly says those are one category. We're just saying this, it seems like this is what the author's doing. He's treating them both as in the same category. To be clear, the Book of Jubilees does not say it is one category explicitly. I mean, you can interpret that in there. You can, you could say it's implied, if you will, but it's not, or interpreted, drawing from the pattern that we already see in the Book of Jubilees. So if someone wants to argue that those are two separate concerns that happens to share a word, all right, that's a reasonable position to take, but if that's where you come from, then let me know in the live chat. I want to hear about it. So then we have Genesis chapter 3. Okay? And if we go down here to verse 21, it says, Yahweh God made garments of animal skins for Adam and for his wife and clothed them. So this is where a lot of people believe that the the animal skins here were basically the sacrifice of the animals. This is the first time the animal was sacrificed to cover their sins. I would not say that. It's the first time that it mentions something like this, but it doesn't explicitly say that. Because here's the thing, okay? There's lots of arguments against that position, by the way. And there's reason to not believe that position because they were not fully forgiven. They really didn't have atonement. Why would they be driven out of the garden if they did? If they were forgiven, if they received atonement, why would they still be driven out of the garden? Right? So true salvation is to reclaim the fall of man. True atonement is to reclaim what you lost in sin. Not to, just go on and say, oh, I'm just poking along here in life and I'm still paying, I'm still being punished for my sin even though I've received atonement. No. That's not the case. So Jubilees does something with this passage. Let's go over to Jubilees. And we're going to go to Jubilees chapter 3. And let's start with verse 30, right at the top here. It says, "And to Adam alone he did give the wherewithal to cover his shame of all the beasts and cattle. On this account it is prescribed on the heavenly tablets as touching all those who know the judgment of the law, that they should they should cover their shame and should not uncover themselves as the Gentiles uncover themselves." So, in Jubilees, it becomes a commandment. Again, doing exactly what Matthew did. To Mark, he's taken the base, the foundation, and building on it, adding stuff to it. So the author of Jubilees is adding to what it says in the book of Genesis. Notice it says in Jubilees written on the heavenly tablets. These are the spiritual tablets, not the tablets that are found in the earthly Ark of the Covenant that Moses made, but rather the spiritual tablets that are in the heavenly realms. So, and it says that it's written on the heavenly tablets that those who know judgment should cover their shame and should not uncover themselves as the Gentiles uncover themselves. So you think about this again. If the author lived in the Hellenistic period, then no wonder he would say, as the Gentiles uncover themselves. Because we have, the Greeks that participated in sports activities and the Colosseum completely naked. You see how we get these hints of the author in here and the date and the timeline of the actual text. So in this text we have the commandment not to uncover themselves. And so it's an act of divine kindness in Genesis 3. In this act of divine kindness in covering them has become a permanent law in Jubilees, with the Gentiles named explicitly in the same breath as the thing you are being distinguished from. So we went a few different live streams on this already, and in the lifetime of the author, we have the Greek gymnasium operating in Jerusalem, and they were all training naked, they were all playing naked, if you will. So again, this is the reason why we have the author. Apparently, I shouldn't say it like as if 100% certain, but it just seems to be one of those little clues in there, as the Gentiles uncover themselves. Why would he say that unless he has some experience, or he knows that these Gentiles uncover themselves. Very, very indicative of the Greek Colosseum. So this is not an abstract meditation on modesty. And the historical setting makes the passage especially interesting because of the games that was played in the Hellenistic, 2nd century BC, operating in Jerusalem. And 2nd Maccabees tells us that even priests were participating in these athletic exercises. So Jubilees takes the clothing of Adam and turns it in. Genesis doesn't state the rule in this form. Jubilees turns the Genesis scene into a commandment and places the commandment on the heavenly tablets. So we have the two walls we're talking about, blood and the body. You can see the method already. You take something that the Torah says once, and almost lightly, if you will. I mean, it's not a whole lot in Genesis there about that. And it turns it into something eternal, absolute, and, unequivocal. Putting it in the heaven, cementing it as eternal. So let's talk about language now. We'll get into the Tower of Babel. Again, if you know of anybody that's interested in this kind of stuff, share the live stream, send them a link, retweet it, repost it, whatever you got to do, put it on your social media feeds. I do have the live chat open, especially on YouTube, and I can see everything on YouTube right now. If you're not on YouTube, I may or may not be able to see it. What you could do is either go over to YouTube or send me an email, ChristopherEnoch@proton.me. ChristopherEnoch@proton.me. And I'll take a look at that email before we close out here tonight. So, language. Let's talk about it. That's the next one on the list. So, because in this book, Hebrew isn't one language among many. It's the so-called language of creation, lost at Babel, and given back to one man by an angel. Again, do I believe this is historical? No, I'm not saying it is, but this is what it appears to say. Okay, let's look at it for what it appears to say, at least at surface value. So that means that every other tongue on earth, if you look at it that way, including the Greek tongue, is just a relic of a curse. You see what people do, right? In any given religion, you take the primary language of that religion and you make it like this is the language of God. This is the language of creation. I personally believe that the language of God is the language of the Spirit, which surpasses any kind of earthly language by a long shot. Anything that mere mortal earthly lips can communicate is something that is far lower than, is on a completely different lower level than that of God himself. And we do believe that God is a spirit. So, Jubilees does this. Hebrew is the language of creation, and therefore every other language is basically just a relic of a curse. And the table. We'll talk about the table, because there's a verse in chapter 22 about who you may eat with, and once you've read and once you understood a great deal about the set of arguments that show up 300 years later in the New Testament, it's something that's really striking. And then at the end of this section, we have Shechem. Okay? So Yeah, this is found in Jubilees. We'll talk about Jubilees chapter 3, kind of parallels Genesis chapter 3 in a way, okay? So, yeah, that's what we have there. Now let's go back to our table. Blood, the body, and language. So the third wall. And this is super interesting, folks, because it's the one where you can watch him take something genuinely difficult and make it simple. Too simple. Okay? It's almost like the Sunday school, kind of children's Bible story version of it. So let's go to Jubilees. Again, I know there are new people here jumping on many different platforms here. I'm live, by the way. I'm live on several different platforms at once. So if you're wondering, what I'm talking about with certain, I may be interacting with other people on other platforms. I'm live on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, X. I'm live on X right now, and a few other platforms, by the way. So, yeah, Jubilees is called the Little Genesis. It's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's also found in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Christian Church, touting some 45 to 50 million members worldwide. It's no small thing. So we're going to go to the Book of Jubilees, and I'm using the translation that's found at pseudepigrapha.com for your own reference, in case you want to check it out yourself. Pseudepigrapha.com. All right, so let's go to the Jubilees, and this is chapter 10, and we'll go down to verse 18. And we'll read until verse 26. It says, and in the 33rd Jubilee, and in the first year of the second week, Peleg took to himself a wife whose name was Loma, the daughter of Sinar. And she bare him a son in the 4th year of this week, and he called his name Reu. And he said, behold, the children of men have become evil through the wicked purpose of building for themselves a city and a tower in the land of Shinar. Again, this is talking about the Tower of Babel. Okay, if you're interested in at all in this kind of stuff, make sure you stay tuned. And again, share the live stream. Let your friends know. Verse 19, right up here at the top. For they departed from the land of Ararat. That would be after the flood of Noah, if you will, when the ark landed there, eastward to Shinar. And for in his days they built the city and the tower, saying, go to, let us ascend thereby into heaven. I want to say this. This is a little bit of a side note, and I think it's pertinent for me to say this. I think it's important for you all to hear this. I know as a little child, you might have heard this story, they wanted to build a tower up to heaven, like literal heaven, going up into the sky. I don't believe this is what it's talking about at all. And this is another piece of evidence. Talk about heaven. We just came from a mini-series doing a reaction video to Vlad Savchuk about heaven. This is a really good piece of evidence against this whole physical kind of heaven you got to work yourself up to. It's spiritual, folks. Spiritual. You remember in the Gospels where Yeshua said, Capernaum, you're exalted up to heaven, but you will be brought down to Hades. Y'all know that Yeshua was talking figuratively here. He wasn't literally meaning that one of the cities in the Holy Land, Capernaum or Bethesda, that they actually were lifted up into, heaven literally and physically. No. When he says you're exalted up to heaven, what he's talking about is pride, arrogance, spiritually rich, not poor in spirit, being humble, but look at us, basically Daniel chapter 4 talking about Nebuchadnezzar on his roof. The roof of the palace, and look at all the things that my hands have made. Look at the kingdom that I have built. Exalting himself, so to speak, into the quote unquote spiritual heaven, if you will. Like he's pretty much almost like God. You know what I mean? So that, I do believe, is what it's talking about. Just in the same way that Yeshua spoke of other cities, in other cities being exalted to heaven, but will be brought down to Hades, spiritually, figuratively, not literally. No. It's impossible to even. It's just no. It's crazy. It's really crazy, because it goes against all the laws of physics and the laws of creation that God has put in place. It just doesn't. It won't work. This is an exalted spiritual realm that overlays the earth, so to speak, okay? So they said, let's ascend thereby into heaven. Verse 20, and they began to build, and in the 4th week they made brick with fire, and bricks served them for stone, and the clay with which they cemented them together was asphalt, which came out of the sea, and out of the fountains of water in the land of Shinar. And they built it 43 years. They were building it, and its breadth was 203 bricks, and its height was the third of one. Its height amounted to 5,433 cubits and 2 palms. And the extent of one wall was 13 stades. That'd be stadium. And the other 30 stades. And the Lord our God said to us, behold, they are one people. And this will they begin to do, and now nothing will be withholden from them. Go to, let us go down and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech, that they may be dispersed into cities and nations, and one purpose will no longer abide with them until the day of judgment. And the Lord descended, and we descended with him. This is we being the angels of God, okay? To the city, to see the city and the tower which the children of men had built. And he confounded their language, and they no longer understood one another's speech, and they ceased then to build the city and the tower. For this reason the whole land of Shinar is called Babel, because the Lord did there confound all the language of the children of men, and from there they were dispersed into their cities, each according to his language and his nation. And the Lord sent a mighty wind against the tower, and overthrew it upon the earth, and behold, it was between Ashur and Babylon in the land of Shinar, and they called its name Overthrow. Okay, yeah, so reads different than Genesis. So there you have it, the account of Babel. Notice the detail that he adds: the tower's height, its measurements, how long they had built for, and then God sends a great wind to throw it down. That's not in Genesis. In Genesis, the tower is just abandoned. Nobody knocks it over. But really, that's a small thing. Here's something that's a little bit bigger. If we go over to Jubilees chapter 12, and we go down to verse 25 and verse 26, this is what we got. It says, and the Lord God said, open his mouth and his ears, that he may hear and speak with his mouth, with the language which has been revealed. For it had ceased from the mouths of all the children of men from the day of the overthrow of Babel. And I opened his mouth and his ears and his lips, and I began to speak with him in Hebrew, in the quote-unquote tongue of creation. So here in this context, it's talking about Abraham. Abram is sitting there, and an angel comes and opens his mouth and teaches him Hebrew, according to this, which the text calls the tongue of creation. And it says, this tongue had ceased from the mouths of all the children of men from the day of the overthrow. So you put the two together and you get a complete system. Hebrew, according to this, is presented as the original language and the tongue of creation. It was lost at Babel, and in Jubilees it is restored to Abraham by an angel of the presence of God who teaches him Hebrew. Which means every other language on earth, including Greek, which probably was the language and the culture of the author of the book of Hebrews, or the Book of Jubilees, excuse me. So that includes Greek. And, where the people went to learn the Greek in the gymnasium. So this is not a neutral thing here in the Book of Jubilees. It's basically saying it's condemning Greek, it's condemning every other language except for Hebrew. Basically, every other language except for Hebrew is a relic of a curse. That is a very effective wall. You can persuade a young man that the language he's learning to get on in the world is the residue of divine judgment. You've done more than just tell him not to study. You've made the study itself feel like a defect. So, that's Jubilees. Now, let's go back to that actual passage, because, I don't think that Genesis chapter 11 says what most of us were taught it says. And I'd rather show you myself here. Let's go to Genesis chapter 11 and read it. Now, I'm not going to get into a deep study here. We already did this a couple times on this channel. Actually, I think it's 3 times at least on this channel, getting into a deep study of what this means. And I guarantee you it doesn't mean what you heard it meant. They're trying to build a literal tower to literally reach as high as possible to the heavens, and God comes down. There's only one language on earth at that time, and that's it. He just confounds them all, and they all of a sudden different language. They all walk away just murmuring different things, and they can't understand. That's not it. That's not it. Okay? Check this out. Genesis chapter 11. Verse 1, and the whole earth was of one speech and of one language and of one speech. That word one, by the way, in the Hebrew, echad, it doesn't necessarily mean one as in single. It's also used to mean unified. Like, a man shall leave his mother and his father to go to his wife and be joined to his wife, and the two will become echad. That doesn't mean that literally a man and his wife will be literally one literal body. No. Of course, they still are two. They're just unified. That's the exact word that's used here. Echad. Verse 2, and they traveled east, and they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they lived there. And they said to one another, come, let's make bricks and burn them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. They said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches to the sky, and let us make a name for ourselves. Let us be scattered abroad. Lest, in other words, so that we're not scattered abroad on the surface of the whole earth. Yahweh came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. Yahweh said, behold, they are one people. Again, one, the same word here. Echad. That doesn't mean that God only saw one literal single human being there. No. Okay? In the same way, it's not one single language. Many languages, but they were able to understand each other. They knew how to interpret, translate each other's language. Who knows? Maybe they had like ancient technology, like some of the stuff like, where they could just instantly translate. I'm just saying, it never ceases to amaze us, the stuff that we find in archaeological excavations. So Yahweh says, behold, they are one people, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing will be withheld from them which they intend to do. The power of unity. Verse 7, come, let's go down, and there confuse their language, and that they may not understand one another's speech. So Yahweh scattered them abroad from there on the surface of all the earth. They stopped building the city, therefore its name was called Babel, because there Yahweh confused the language of all the earth. From there Yahweh scattered them abroad on the surface of all the earth. There you have it. That's all we have, really. That's all we have in that story. It's just 9 verses. How much people read into it that it doesn't actually say? How much people misinterpret it? Not fully understanding what it means. So here again, where it says the whole earth, that word in the Hebrew is eretz. It doesn't necessarily mean the whole earth as we think of it. The Hebrew word eretz, yes, it can mean the whole earth. Yes, it can. But it can also mean a continent, a country, a county, a city. It can mean something as little as a field. The better word to translate eretz is not earth. It's land. That's a better way to translate it. Did you know? Put it this way. In Israel today, they call that country Haaretz in Hebrew, which means the land. It doesn't mean that Israel is the whole earth. It just means that that particular little country is Eretz, land. Okay? So the same thing here talks about the whole earth, this, the whole earth, that, the whole earth. Don't think it means what the translators have put in there. Look at the fullness of the scope and the spectrum of what that Hebrew word actually means. So, yeah, the King James Version puts it in there like the whole earth, all that kind of stuff. Most of us learned that, as, somebody spoke one, so, like basically there's a city called Babel and everybody spoke one language back in those days, and God made lots of languages. But again, look at the Hebrew. And let's go on over to this here, okay? Here's a little illustration of the different Hebrew words. 2 Hebrew words. The one here is Safa, and Safa literally means lip. You want to be literal? Like Mr. Savchuk there, for the past several nights we were doing it. You want to be literal? It literally means lip. That's what it means. And the other Hebrew word is Lashon, and that literally means tongue. You can interpret that, of course, as language too. So, in Genesis chapter 10, here's the kicker, folks. Get this. The chapter before the Tower of Babel, Genesis chapter 10, repeatedly uses these words describing people according to their own languages. Look at here. So we have the sons of Japheth in verse 2, after his language, everyone according to his language. In other words, they had their own language. The Hamites in verse 6. And you look down here, again in verse 20, according to their languages. Languages, plural. This is in Genesis chapter 10. This is before the Tower of Babel. Okay? Shocker to a lot of people. We get this over and over and over again. Like if I do a word search here for language, you got everyone after his own language, basically, in verse 5. We got languages in verse 20. We got languages in verse 31. Of course, there were languages at the bottom, so that doesn't count. So we got 3 times, 3 different peoples, 3 different quote-unquote nationalities, if you will, all with their own languages. They wouldn't tell you that in Sunday school or in the children's Bibles. No wonder we have so many atheists today. When people, when people take things too overly simplistic, go against known history, known science, and just, believe a super simplistic, literal reading of the text. We shouldn't do that. So, this term languages, Genesis doesn't even use it. Okay? That is Lashon. In verse 1 of Genesis chapter 11, it says, Safa, one language, one speech, one Safa. Verse 6, when God says the people are one Safa, right here, one language, it's one Safa, one lip. God says the people are one and have one Safa. Verse 7 says, let us confound their Safa. Verse 9, there the Lord confounded the Safa of all the earth. Very important to understand. So Genesis chapter 11 doesn't even use the term Lashon. Doesn't even use that term whatsoever. So 4 times lip every time in Genesis chapter 11. Now, hold that thought and then turn back to chapter 1. So we go back to Genesis chapter 1 and we go back, not Genesis chapter 1, we go back to Genesis chapter 10. And we look at we look at what it says here. The table of the nations, the descendants of Noah, spreading out, everyone after his literal tongue, if you will, Lashon in the Hebrew, after their families, after their nations. And that is the word that is conflated with Safa. Safa means lip, Lashon means tongue or language. So, it's the refrain of the whole chapter 10. The sons of Japheth after their tongues, after their languages. The sons of Ham after their tongues, their languages. The sons of Shem after their tongues, after their languages. So the chapter before the Tower of Babel describes families, nations, already divided, different languages, different tongues. And then in chapter 11, it opens by saying the whole earth had one, quote-unquote, Safa, lip, not tongue, not language. Those are 2 different words. And they are sitting 1 page apart, and people totally misunderstand it. And, again, they go by just an overly simplistic reading of it. Here is another graphic here. We have Genesis chapter 11, 3 readings, the flashback reading. Chapter 11 explains how chapter 10 happened. You could say that Hebrew narrative doubles back as Genesis chapter 2 does after Genesis chapter 1. That's the majority position. The Jubilees reading, one language, and it was Hebrew. Again, the author of Jubilees taking things a little bit too literally, just like the Pharisees and the Sadducees do, and unfortunately, a lot of Christians do today. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. The Jubilees reading says, one language, it was Hebrew, lost at the overthrow of Babel, given back to Abram by an angel. No ambiguity left there. Then there's the unity reading of this, one lip, not one tongue, many peoples, one understanding. What is taken away is coordination, not speech. A minority reading. This is where I personally stand. I know it's a minority reading, but hey, the bandwagon's not always right all the time as far as I'm concerned. So, two of these readings, two of these interpretations are arguments. One of them ends the argument. 3 ways to handle the story of the Tower of Babel. Again, one reading is the common reading. Basically, that there's only one language, the linguistic diversity summarized in chapter 10 came about later. Hebrew narrative does this. It gives you the outcome and then doubles back to explain how it happened. You've seen it before. Genesis chapter 1 tells you about creation. So this is what somebody could argue. Genesis chapter 1 tells you about creation, and Genesis chapter 2 doubles back to tell you that this is how it came about. So on this reading, chapter 10 shows you lots of different languages, and then chapter 11 just kind of doubles back to show you this is how it came about. That's one interpretation. It's completely respectable reading. If you want to read it like that, then fine. It doesn't really take the core of the argument away. It just looks at it from a different light. So that is the interpretation that's held by many scholars and commentators today. And it really fits, it does fit how the book of Genesis is actually written and behaves elsewhere. So the reading number 2 again is there's no ambiguity at all. This interpretation says that there was one language, it was Hebrew, and the language was the language of creation. It was taken away and given back to Abram later on. Done. And then the third one is where I personally stand right now, and that is, that Safa, literally lip, can mean language, of course, but it can also describe a speech or a manner in which a people can communicate, not necessarily a language. So on my reading of, or my interpretation of Genesis chapter 11, it may be emphasized not merely linguistically, not merely linguistic uniformity, but a shared capacity to communicate and, coordinate, if you will. It's a common, it's naming a common understanding. So a shared way of speaking, the ability of many people with many languages to make themselves understood to one another through one way or another, whether they were all polyglots or they all understood, they could all speak in many different languages, or whether they had technology or whatever the case would be. On that reading, the earth or the land at Babel isn't linguistically identical, it's just simply unified. people with different tongues, one project, able to coordinate, able to understand each other somehow. And what God takes away isn't language. The languages are already there in chapter 10. What God takes away is just the ability to translate, throwing a wrench into their technology or their system, or maybe it is divine confusion, a mass psychosis, mass confusion, in which they just were not able to understand each other anymore. Perhaps the languages evolved into a state quite quickly that they couldn't understand one another. Maybe there was confusion. Maybe there was just hastiness and lots of confusion that happened there. So if you look at what God actually says is the problem, it's not that they all speak the same language. The problem is what they can do together. It's the unity. Nothing they propose will be withheld from them, it says in the scriptures. The danger in the passage is coordination, unification. The judgment fits the crime. He doesn't take away their speech, he takes away their ability to work unified. So it's not united anymore, it's divided. That's a story about the limits God puts on unified human ambition, which is considerably more serious story than and that's why it's a lot more serious than somebody saying, well, this is why French speak French, this is why Spanish speak Spanish, so Calamento says, hey, y'all could not reply in chats earlier. The one language at the Tower of Babel is fascinating with the ziggurat. Wouldn't that be Sumerian language, as that was the time where Mesopotamia flourished? That's a really good question, Calamentos. Yeah, it very well could be. I really don't have the I don't have the details about that. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that question. Maybe somebody in the live chat, you want to look this up? You want to look this up and let me know what you got there? Like, would it be the Sumerian language? Let me know what you got. Yeah, thank you, Calamentals, for the question. I'm sorry, I really don't know the answer to that one. That's a very deep question for sure. I suppose a historical linguist would be able to answer that a lot better than I could. Or anybody in the live chat, just let me know. And again, my email is open as well for those of you. If you put something in the live chat and I don't see it, please do understand I can only see basically what's in the YouTube live chat and not in the other platforms, as far as I know. Maybe not. I'm not sure. So, yeah. Again, Calamentos, that's an awesome question. I'm sorry I can't really answer that one. So, Safa and Lashon are two different words, but here's the thing: we need to be careful here because they're not always distinct. Almost like how we're talking about before, we have two different words in the Hebrew or two different words in the Greek. Like what was the kainos and naos kind of thing? It's the same kind of thing. Between Lashon and Safa doesn't always mean that they're distinct. they get used in parallel in other places. Isaiah chapter 28, for example, has stammering lips and another tongue in the same breath. Ezekiel chapter 3 uses them both with the same idea, which means that they can and they do overlap. They're not two sealed technical terms, and anybody can tell you that Safa can never mean a language, is really just overstating it. So my argument is not that these words cannot mean the same thing. My argument is narrower. The author of Genesis chapter 11 had both words available. He used it in the previous chapter. He used one of them 4 times, and the other one all the way through, and he used the other one all the way through the previous chapter, right? So he used Lashon all the way through chapter 10, and he used Safa all the way through chapter 11. So it seems to be a pattern, and it seems to be like deliberate, but it's an argument from word choice, and arguments from word choice are suggestive and not decisive. So I'm open to take any other interpretation, of course, but that's basically where I stand at the moment. Let me know what you guys think again in the live chat. Yeah, so Mary asked earlier, was that the Benjamin thing? You think sorry, this was earlier. I'm sorry, just getting the context here. You're talking about the story of Jacob speaking over his sons. We didn't get to Benjamin yet. We're talking about Simeon and Levi. If that was your question, Mary, I'm not 100% sure. Please let me know if I'm missing it there. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, so here's the chart again. The canonical text leaves a real interpretive question about how Genesis 10 and Genesis chapter 11 relate. And the Hebrew word Safa can be understood as either lip or language, depending on the context. You can hold interpretation 1 on the top there. You can hold the bottom one, the third interpretation. You can argue about it, and people do. And that argument is available to you because the text left room for it. But, Jubilees, again, it basically closes it. Not by arguing that he doesn't really engage the question. He simply writes the answer into the story. One language, it was Hebrew, it was the language of creation. It was lost, and the angel gave it back, and he gave it to Abram, put it in his mouth, so to speak, where you basically, the author made it so you can't really cross-examine it very much. So, since my own interpretation on the table, this time, I'm not really upset. It's not a big deal that Jubilees disagrees with me on this one, as I do I would expect it to, because Jubilees, again, the author takes things a little bit more literally than I would. Plenty of people disagree. That's fine. And we can be pleasant about it. Let me know again with you guys in the live chat if you guys know of any other interpretations, or if you personally hold a different interpretation, and just let me know in the live chat, or let me know why that happens, or let me know why, you believe that. Yeah, so Jubilees, Jubilees. And we'll go to chapter 22. And let's go down to verse 16. It says, "And you, my son Jacob, remember my words, and observe the commandments of Abraham your father. Separate yourself from the nations, and eat not with them. Do not according to their works, and become not their associate. For their works are unclean, and all their ways are a pollution, and an abomination, and uncleanness." Right. So, okay. Jubilees chapter 22, verse 16. And if you compare that with Genesis, it's a little bit different. So we got Jubilees chapter 22, and separate from the nations. Do not eat with them. Do not according to their works. Do not become their companion. Now that sounds like a dietary rule, but it isn't. Because some people would say that. Some people would say, well, it says not to eat with the Gentiles, not to eat their kind of food. But it really isn't. In many ancient societies, shared meals were an important way of marking fellowship, loyalty, hospitality, and social belonging. So when Jubilees says, "Eat not with them," the table becomes one practical way of enforcing separation. It's how alliances are made, how households are joined, how a stranger stops being a stranger. You can trade with somebody you never eat with. You can live in the same city. But the table is where the boundary actually gets crossed. So he closes the table, closes the door. And once the table is closed, everything downstream of it closes too. Because the meal is where courtship happens, where business becomes friendship, where families discover they are like each other. Close the table, and you've created another social barrier against the relationships that can lead to intermarriage. So, by the 1st century AD, roughly 2 centuries later from the writing of this Jubilees, there is a serious argument in the early Jesus movement, if you will, the way, early Christians, about what exactly this is, what it means in its interpretation of it, whether Jewish believers may eat with Gentile believers or not. It's in Acts, it's in Galatians, it's one of the sharpest conflicts in the New Testament. Now, I'm not telling you that the writers read Jubilees, although I believe that at least one did, the writer of 2 Peter, for example. What I am saying is that the question was old by then, even in the New Testament. It had been argued about for centuries. And when you meet it in the New Testament, you're not meeting a new controversy. You're walking into the late stages of one. And that's what a book like this gives you. Not a source, it's a context. Which brings us to the 5th wall. And this is where the book stops being austere and starts being a little bit frightening. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this tomorrow, folks.